Before we begin, it's important to note that this episode contains topics that some people may find upsetting. The conversation includes a discussion of drug use. Please listen at your own discretion.
Welcome back to the In Chamber. I'm your host, Tom Schumann. We began season 4 with a conversation with Brian Cuban, a leading national voice on addiction and recovery. We hope you were able to hear his insights and perspective. If not, that episode is available at indianachamber.com/podcast or wherever you get your podcast. We follow up today with a similar story, this one local. It is one of many stories of people impacted by what began as an addiction to pain medication. And while, yes, we must set the stage to detail the depths of the impact, these accounts, these stories are about hope and recovery, and that's certainly the case today. As the Indiana Workforce Recovery Initiative, which focuses on helping employers assist their employees, has unfolded over the past 2.5 years, I've been so impressed by the people willing to come forward and tell their stories. Yes, it may be helpful for them to, quote, own what transpired in their lives, but they are doing so to try and benefit others. If one person is helped by listening or reading about someone else's difficulties, what a gift that person has given. Today's guest is no exception in that willingness to come forward. Kimberly Lewis, welcome to the In Chamber.
Thank you.
We're so happy that you've joined us today. Kimberly's a tech support analyst at ClickGoodwill, 2 years after starting at the organization in an entry-level position. We'll focus on that in a few minutes, but first, Kimberly, if you would, talk about some of the circumstances that led to your addiction challenges.
So my addiction to opiates actually began with an injury. I had a cracked vertebrae in my back, and I was already in a toxic relationship that we weren't always doing the best things anyways. So, I started getting pain medication through my doctor, and with opioids, you quickly develop a tolerance. So it was every time going in and needing more and more and higher milligrams. Until eventually, I wasn't able to get them through my doctor anymore. And I started purchasing them on the street. And then the price for those got so high that I couldn't afford it, and which led to some crime. And eventually someone came up to me and was like, hey, you can get heroin for this price. And it's literally like, I didn't wake up one morning and said I wanted to be a heroin addict. It was a progression over time of opioids needing more and more and more just to maintain and not be sick.
Kimberly, can you talk a little bit about that time frame, that time period? For you, again, you say you had the injury and you're taking more opioids, and then that need, did this develop rather quickly?
It was over maybe 4 or 5 months before I had jumped from pain medication to heroin. And then it was less than a year before I had committed the crime that ultimately landed me in prison. Mm-hmm. It happened rather fast. I mean, heroin took me just all the way to rock bottom.
So Kimberly, you had a career in accounting at the time. While you were working, did you take specific steps to hide any problems from your employer, or in your mind, were there clear distinctions between what you were able to do at work and the addictions you were suffering outside in your personal life?
In my mind back then, I'm sure I felt like no one knew, right? But honestly, there's always telltale signs. There's changes in behavior, there's changes in attendance, there's changes in attitude or outlook on life. And I had one goal back then, and that was just to meet my need that I had with drugs. So I'm sure that everyone knew, regardless of what I thought. And you can't maintain employment like that. So
If that became the one goal, as you just said, the overriding goal, then there's really, I guess I would suppose, no way to separate work from that, because doing what you needed to do 24 hours a day to reach that goal obviously would include time at work.
absolutely.
You told me, we had an earlier discussion, you talked about the criminal activity. You mentioned having to resort to some things to get the drugs that you needed. What were the other types of criminal activity? What was led to your prison sentence?
What led to my prison sentence was ultimately fraud and forgery, but it goes along with every addict. Like, by nature, they're manipulators. They're just trying to get what they need. And everything in my life was like that back then. Like, every time I had a conversation with a family member or a conversation with a friend is always to benefit something to support my habit. Like, nothing was done on the up and up or for a good reason. It was literally everything in my life surrounded my addiction.
So is it accurate to say that the fraud and the forgery were directly to support your drug use?
Absolutely.
Can you talk about family relationships at the time? I believe you mentioned you had a son at a young age, but whether direct family or friends, how did the drug use impact your family relationships?
It just destroyed them. My dad raised me, and by the time that I caught this charge, he had literally washed his hands of me. Like, it affected every relationship in my life. No one could trust me. I couldn't even trust the things I was saying. It was awful. And I actually have 3 boys, and 2 of them I had before I was 18. And this took a toll on them too. So when we talk about addiction, back then I didn't think I was hurting anybody but myself. I was the addict. I'm not hurting anybody. The truth is, I hurt everyone that came into contact with me.
My question then is what changed? What I mentioned earlier, we had a conversation with Brian Cuban. That was our first episode this year. And he talked, after 20 plus years of addictions and drug use and alcohol use, that it came back to family was one of the drivers of not wanting to permanently lose those relationships. Was that a factor? Was the prison sentence you were handed, was that a key factor in your turnaround?
All of those things were a factor in it. But honestly, by the time I had gotten arrested, I was just exhausted, just tired. Like, you spend all day, every day searching for this high, and there's no fruit of your efforts, right? You're not happy. You don't have any joy in your life. And it was a long process, but it was a lot of looking at myself and seeing, my own faults, because we all have things that we know when we're alone with ourselves we're not proud of. Well, with me, there was a long laundry list of them, and it was, just looking at them and deciding I didn't want to be that person anymore.
Kimberly, I believe am I correct to say you were sentenced to 13 or 15 years in prison?
I was sentenced to 15 years, and I was under the old state law, so I had to do half of that time.
Okay. And this was about what year was this? What time frame?
2012, 2013.
Right. So talk about that again, expand a little bit. You said it really is a matter of looking at yourself and not wanting to be that person anymore. What did you start to do in prison, and were there certain support mechanisms in the criminal justice system, in the prison system that helped you along that way?
Sure. So there were programs that, honestly, in the beginning, I just got in for the time cut. I'm trying to get out of prison as fast as I can. And, but I gleaned what I could from those programs. There are things along the way that have helped me. There were programs that kept me up to date on technology, which helped my current job now. And then there were things just since I've been out, like it wasn't one thing, it was multiple things. It was the programs in prison, it was the support system out here, it was my employer. There were a million things that helped me along the way. I didn't turn into a heroin addict overnight, and I sure didn't become the person I am today overnight. It's a million small decisions that made me who I am today.
And I apologize for being overly emphasizing the time frame here, but I think it just gives the listeners a sense. So when you entered into prison at 2012, 2013, and you mentioned going through some of these programs just for the sake of going through them and getting the credit for them, is there, again, a certain period in there, 2 years later, 3 years later, where you said, okay, I'm going to use this education and training I'm going to get, and that again was kind of that turning point?
Absolutely. It was about 2.5 years into my sentence. The first couple of years, I was still angry,
Understandable, yes.
Absolutely. How dare them give me this much time, just real angry, and just really didn't want to take any of the responsibility for anything. And I got in a program in the Indiana Department of Corrections, and I met some wonderful people, some wonderful volunteers, chaplain, and just doing that program just really made me see just really how awful I was. And, you would think that'd be a bad thing to see, but it's actually very helpful. When you can own your own faults, there's so much freedom in that to make the changes and be accountable and to start working on those things.
When it comes to career and skills, and again, our prior conversation, I think you said you realized that getting back into your previous accounting profession would be extremely difficult, but what interested you in information technology in that area?
Well, I've kind of always been involved in it. Like I said earlier, my dad raised me, and he got into the technology field a year before I was born. I like to joke and say it was when it was still science fiction. But so I've always been around it. He had businesses when I was growing up, and I always worked in them. I always helped him, and I just kind of, it came to me. Excuse me. So it wasn't like a conscious decision, I want to go into this field. It's just, it's always something I've loved to do, and always something that's came natural to me.
So you mentioned, excuse me again, a little bit on the time frame, a 15-year sentence, the requirement to serve half the time, but you end up serving less than that, I assume, based on your behavior and the credits you received. So you get to that point where you're going to exit prison. Talk about the difficulty of that adjustment and at that time, and kind of what your plan was when you were released.
Oh man, that time was scary. Like
a different type of scary, yeah.
Yeah. So when you're incarcerated, you have this magical date in the future that it's just going to be rainbows and butterflies, and they're going to open the doors, and it's just going to be great. But the closer you get to that date, you realize, wow, like I don't have anything. And simple decisions like deciding what kind of shampoo to buy. You had 2 to choose from in prison, and at Walmart you have 50. It is an overwhelming fear of just making the wrong decision. And they can be decisions that the normal person wouldn't even think about. But to somebody coming out after that much time, everything is awkward and a fearful situation. Being around crowds is fearful. just every part of it scary. It's just very scary.
What were your thoughts at the time as far as employment? Or what were, again, the plan leading up to your release, or immediately? Where did you think you would try to pursue?
So I didn't really know. I just knew that I was going to be at work release for a year. I knew that before I had even been sent there. And with my felony background, I really thought, well, let me just get some little job to get me through work release, and then I'll start working on what I'm going to do long term. I when I got to work release, it was just get a job so that I can stay here and pay my what I have to pay, and after I get out of work release, I'll deal with the big picture.
When you're in the work release program, is that when you were at Crane House?
Yes, Crane House is a work release facility for the Department of Corrections.
And as I understand correctly, someone there kind of mentioned to you that the introduced you, so to speak, to ClickGoodwill, which is where shoppers can bid online on unique Goodwill finds. So talk about that referral a little bit and how that led you to Goodwill.
She was a girl that had a room across the hall from me, and she literally, on my first day there, she's like, can you operate computers? And I was like, yeah. She's like, she told me about the job. She said, it told me how much it paid. They didn't care about criminal backgrounds. I knew she worked there, so I knew there wasn't an issue with being in work release. And she told me how to put in my application. And the next day when she came home from work, she's like, hey, they're going to call you and you're going to have an interview. And I was so happy. I didn't think it would happen that fast.
So, Kimberly, to this day, do you sometimes lay your head on the pillow at night and maybe think about that person and thank her for that recommendation of where she led you?
There are so many people that I'm thankful to for where I'm at now, and I don't take that for granted. I pay it forward. So our facility still hires women from the Crane House. We actually just moved to the other side of town, so it's a long bus drive. I pick 3 girls up every single morning and bring them here from the Crane House. I don't take that for granted, the help that was given to me, and I always want to remember that experience and help any way I can other girls that are going through the same thing that I went through.
And we've had the fortune here at the Chamber, through our Biz Voice magazine, through other outlets, over the years to talk about some of the many great programs at Goodwill and the work they do, and in the education areas and the workforce areas. But when you got there, if I understand correctly, and again, this is 2+ years ago, I think your thought process was, okay, I've got this job, this is good, and maybe it was going to lead to something else down the road. I don't think necessarily planning to be there long term. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. In your mind, you have visions of Goodwill, and never did I picture ClickGoodwill. I didn't even know it was a thing. And I sure never pictured myself wanting to stay with Goodwill, or that there would be opportunities that would open up for me here.
Well, I'm going to, quote one of your supervisors at Goodwill here, after you started working there, and this is what the supervisor had to say. Kimmy quickly established herself as a person with a strong work ethic and desire to learn, who is a process thinker, a great communicator, and someone with a great attitude. End quote. So in my words, then I guess you found a new home. Is that correct?
I love it here. I love my position. I love the people here. I love what Goodwill stands for. And like I said, I'm not the outlier. Goodwill does this for so many people, and I believe in what they do. And I'm just so thankful for this place.
Well, you shared, and again in our earlier conversation, about advancing in your job and needing some security clearances. So what was the reaction of your boss, given your past, and again, what does that tell you about your employer when you were in need of those security clearances?
When he called me into the office and asked me, what my exact charge was, I could tell that he might have been a little bit pensive to even ask the question. And I just explained what it was, and he didn't bat an eye after that. He got a hold of who he needed to get a hold of, and they were okay with it. And what that tells me is, Goodwill values the individual. Like, they're not looking at my criminal background. They're not looking at the fact that I used to be a junkie. They're looking at that I show up for work every day. I do my best. I try to always have a positive attitude. We all have those days that doesn't quite work out that way, but I try to. And Goodwill values me as an individual. They're not looking at my DOC number, and they're not looking at all these other things that society can sometimes look at.
Kimberly, as I said, we want to focus, and Indiana Workforce Recovery certainly does this on the recovery aspect. So recovery is ongoing. How is it different for you today than it was that time 2.5 years into your prison sentence, or approximately, where you said to yourself, at that point, I'm going to change. I'm doing this for me. I can be a better person. Recovery, then compared to recovery now, how do you compare those, or how is the challenge a little different today?
It's like night and day. So back then, everything was everyone else's fault, or my circumstances' fault. And now, today, no matter what the situation, I can look at myself and be like, okay, this is the part I played in it. How can I fix this for the next time? And, it's not always easy. Like I said, I have 3 boys, and their lives aren't so easy right now either. I see a lot of the same patterns in them that I used to have, whether it be with addiction or attitude or just anything. Like, I see some of myself in them, and it's a constant humbling experience, and just constantly reminding me that I have to fight. Like, this isn't easy. And, it's not always easy to have those tough conversations about who I used to be, or to even have tough conversations about how I'm feeling. The thing with addicts, I know with me personally, is I'm learning how to live sober for the first time in a very long time.
And it's an ongoing learning experience.
Absolutely. It's not easy, but like I said, it's the small decisions every day that keep me going.
Well, I'm sure you mentioned earlier picking up people, three women at the Crane House, and giving them the opportunity to go to work, whether it's them or others that you talk with. What is some of the guidance you share with people when asked about your journey to where you are today?
Like I said, it's just always looking at me. We can always find somebody that does something wrong, or that does something that upsets us. But when you're always looking at yourself instead of everybody else, it changes your point of view. Like, I know how bad I am to the core. I know the bad things I've done. I know the things that I will always have guilt over. So it's always looking at myself and being responsible for my actions, being responsible for my attitude, and just wanting to be better each day. It's not going to come overnight. It's a slow process. We want everything instant these days, but it's not like that. And you have to be content in your situation, and be grateful. Be grateful for everything.
Kimberly, a similar question, but consider this kind of an opportunity to talk directly to employers. Much of our audience are the employers. Goodwill is certainly focused on assisting people, providing those second chances. But when it comes to employers helping their employees either deal with opioid or other addictions, well, what message would you offer to those employers?
I would say that, it's twofold. So first of all, the person has to be coachable, but you have to have leadership in place that is able to coach people, come alongside them and show them a different way to do things. When I look at my leaders here, I don't ever look at them as, like an authoritarian type situation. They're always coaching me to be better, to, okay, let's look at this time. How could we do this better next time? I mean, they don't say it that way, of course, but they're very good at coaching and coming alongside me and helping me to see where I can be better. And I think that that's got to be foundational for any employer dealing with people with barriers like addiction or criminal backgrounds, because they're very broken people. A harsh word when you're straight out of prison could break somebody, and they can feel like a failure and go straight back. And I'm not saying baby them or put on kid gloves, but honestly, there has to be some level of empathy for the situation they're in. Like, they know the mistakes they've made. They don't need to be reminded. They need some encouragement, not a hand out, but definitely a hand up.
Yeah, the Indiana Workforce Recovery Initiative that I mentioned that the Chamber's been part of for the last few years, along with the Wellness Council, is focused in part on helping reduce that stigma, the stigma of drug use, not, even early on. And we've seen we've surveys and seen things where the reaction of employers to any drug use initially was termination without any real opportunity. We're seeing some of that change, I guess. But my question for you, are you seeing it? Do you think there is a lessening of the stigma associated with addictions?
I do. And I think the opioid crisis is a big part of that shift, because now you have, family people, business professionals that have gotten prescriptions from their doctor. And I think when it started with pain medication, it started to change the stigma. You're not going out on the street corner to get Vicodin. You're getting them from your doctor. So it made, I think, a lot of people realize that it can affect anyone. It's not just this, image you have in your head of some movie you saw. It's the person you work with. It's the person that you're best friends with. It's the person you go to church with. It couldn't be anyone.
Well, Kimberly, we're going to wrap up here. Last couple of questions. Talk personally for you, looking ahead a little bit. As you mentioned, each day is maybe a challenge, but maybe an opportunity also. But as you look ahead for yourself, for your sons, what are some of the keys going forward?
Just to be honest, and honesty is not always easy, but I try to be honest every day, because I can't guarantee what 10 years from now is going to look like. I started being an adult pretty late in life. So I don't know what to do except deal with what I'm facing today and try to be a better person than I was yesterday and show a better example to my friends, my family, my children. Just try to always be a good example and be responsible for me. We can try and take on the whole world and worry about all these different problems, but in the end, it's defeating if you do that. You can only worry about yourself, your actions, your decisions, your honesty, your accountability, and just be grateful for today.
That leads to the final question that we're asked everybody this season in our podcast, and I think it's especially significant for you and all the things you've just described. But what makes a great day for you? At the end of the day, what tells you this has been a really good day for myself?
I think for me, at this point in my road, every day is a great day. You can't focus on the little things that upset your day. you got a million things to be thankful for. I mean, I know right now the whole country is just downtrodden over everything that's going on, but we have so much to be thankful for. And I just always got to look at it through that lens.
Well, Kimberly, you mentioned in the answer to the previous question that you started a little late in being an adult, but I can tell you based on this conversation and reading and hearing about your story, you may have started late, but you're doing an excellent job of being an adult yesterday, today, tomorrow, just by talking and sharing your story. And as I said in the introduction, if it helps one person, and I'm sure it's helping many, many more, but if it helps one person, you are being an outstanding adult in that manner then. So
thank you so much.
Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your story.
No problem. Thank you.
All right. Best of luck for Kimberly and her family going forward. Again, just illustrates the power of the addictions that can happen to anyone and the challenges that come. But again, this is about recovery, and there are ways to change and to move forward. I've mentioned Indiana Workforce Recovery and the great work it continues to do. You can learn much more at wellnessindiana.org about the Wellness Council and the IWR initiative. In addition, the 2019 archives of BizVoice magazine contain a year-long series on Indiana workforce recovery and the challenges and opportunities of opioid and other drug use in the workplace. Those stories are at bizvoicemagazine.com. We'll return in 2 weeks, September 19th. We changed focus. I have a conversation with Joe Comartin, who is the Canadian Consul General of Detroit. So we will be talking about Indiana and Canadian trade relationships and many other topics. As always, thank you for joining us on The In Chamber.